It started as just another charming segment on the late-night show until Anne Hathaway saw something that made her pause mid-story and changed everything forever. The theater was comfortably lit, filled with the warm, appreciative energy that always came with certain celebrity interviews. Tonight, Anne Hathaway was the guest, talking about her latest heartfelt drama and the emotional demands of her iconic career. The set was cozy, with the host's desk and Anne's elegant armchair creating the perfect space for what everyone expected would be another candid conversation filled with movie anecdotes and star quality. The audience was a mix of admirers, critics, and industry insiders, all faces focused on the star with the kind of admiration that only comes from years of genuine performance. The host, Stephen, had been looking forward to this interview for weeks. Anne always brought something deeply human to the show. Whether it was an insightful take on acting, a story of genuine vulnerability, or those moments of profound connection that reminded everyone why she'd become one of the most respected actresses of her generation. What nobody noticed during the initial applause was the young man in row 6, seat 12. Ethan Miller, 24 years old, sat rigidly, his worn denim jacket pulled tight around him. In his right hand, hidden partially in the folds of his jacket, was a simple, old cassette recorder, slightly bulky and dated. To everyone else, it looked like a harmless vintage electronic device. But for Ethan, it was the most precious link to his past. The recorder had been used by his younger sister, Maya Chen, just 4 months before Maya lost her battle with a rare neurological disorder. They'd used the recorder together during one of Maya's good afternoons, sitting in the backyard, making silly recordings and whispering secrets about the movies they'd watched together when Maya got better. "Promise me," Maya had whispered as she pressed the recorder into Ethan's hand, her voice weak but clear. "Promise me, you'll play this for Anne someday, and you'll tell her about us, about how her movies got us through everything." Ethan had promised, never imagining that someday would come without Maya beside him. The show opened smoothly. Stephen's introduction was witty and perfectly timed, earning genuine appreciation from the audience. When he introduced Anne Hathaway, the applause was enthusiastic. People on their feet, showing the kind of genuine excitement that reminded everyone why live television could be so compelling. Anne walked onto the stage in a stunning deep blue suit that caught the studio lights perfectly. She hugged Stephen sincerely, waved to the audience with her characteristic poise, and settled into the guest chair with the easy confidence of someone who understood the platform. "Anne Hathaway, everyone," Stephen said, settling behind his desk. "Thank you so much for being here. The new film is deeply moving, and I have to ask, approaching these profoundly emotional roles now, does it feel different with all the life experience you've gained?" Anne smiled, that luminous smile that had captivated millions. "You know, Stephen, it's been such an evolving experience. When I inhabit these characters now, I see them through the lens of everything I've learned about empathy, resilience, human connection, and hope. They mean something different now, something more resonant." As Anne spoke, her eyes naturally scanned the audience, a habit she developed from years of understanding her connection with viewers. Always trying to see the individual stories in the crowd, that's when she saw him. Ethan in row 6, listening with an intensity that went beyond typical fan appreciation. But it wasn't Ethan's attention that caught Anne's eye. It was the way he subtly moved his hand, shielding a small, strange object, as if drawing courage from something fragile. Anne's conversational rhythm faltered slightly. Something about the young man's tense posture, the way he clutched that simple device, spoke to Anne in a silent language that suggested deep meaning. "Actually, Stephen," Anne said, her voice shifting to a gentler tone, "speaking of emotional connections and the ways art touches us, I'm noticing something very intent in the audience right now." Stephen looked intrigued but composed. Anne rarely deviated from their planned flow. Anne leaned forward toward the edge of the stage, her eyes finding Ethan again. "The young man in row 6 in the denim jacket. Would you mind standing up for a moment?" Ethan's eyes widened in disbelief. He looked around nervously, pointing to himself with a confused expression. The audience turned to look at him, and he felt his face heat up with a mixture of hope and paralyzing fear. Yes, you, Anne said softly, her voice carrying the same understanding that defined her most beloved roles. I couldn't help but notice that object you're holding. It looks like it holds a very important message. Stephen was now also focused, instantly sensing this was a genuine, unscripted moment. In all his years of hosting, he'd learned to trust these unexpected turns when something real and moving was about to be shared. Ethan slowly stood up, his legs feeling weak. He instinctively tightened his grip on the small cassette recorder, Maya's recorder, the one that had been a silent companion since the funeral. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Anne asked, her voice carrying clearly across the studio. "Ethan," he replied, his voice a little hoarse, even with the studio's excellent sound system. "Ethan Miller." "Ethan, that's a strong name," Anne said. "And that little machine, what is it? Did you bring something for me?" Ethan nodded, his eyes already starting to well up. "It's a voice recorder. My sister Maya, she wanted me to play something for you. She made this recording for you before she passed away." The studio fell into a respectful silence. Even the small studio band stopped their barely there background music. Stephen felt a deep tug in his chest. This wasn't an interview anymore. This was about to become an exchange of profound human emotion. "Maya made that for me," Anne repeated gently. "When did you lose her, Ethan?" 4 months ago, Ethan said, his voice now clearer, though tight with held-back emotion. "She had a degenerative disorder. We were going to watch your new film together when she stabilized." Anne felt a familiar ache forming in her own eyes. She'd received thousands of fan letters over the years, but something about this moment, this young man, this simple, worn voice recorder, hit her with a powerful immediacy. "Ethan," Anne said, "would you mind if I came up there and we listened to Maya's message together?" Stephen immediately understood what was needed. "Anne, go," he said quietly, a nod of agreement. "We'll hold the moment." Anne Hathaway, a global icon, left the stage and walked toward the audience seating. The cameras followed her, but everyone in the studio seemed to understand that this wasn't about broadcast footage. This was about something deeply personal and sacred. Anne reached Ethan's row, and the people around them subtly made space. She sat down in the empty seat next to Ethan, and for a moment, the famous actress was just another person wanting to hear a final message from a young life cut short. "Tell me about Maya," Anne said simply. Ethan's composed exterior crumbled completely. "She was my little sister," he said through his tears. "We did everything together. When she got sick, your movies were her escape. We would rewatch them together, and it was the only thing that made her truly happy when she was in pain." Anne reached over and gently touched the cassette recorder in Ethan's hand. "This is very brave of you. When did she record it?" "It was on one of her good days," Ethan whispered. "The nurse said her symptoms were stable, and we were outside on the porch, talking about your career. She said she needed to record this for you, so you knew how much you helped her. She called it her final thank you." "What exactly did she say when she gave it to you?" Anne asked, her voice just above a whisper. Ethan looked down at the recorder, then back at Anne. "She made me promise that if she didn't make it, I would still come here and find a way to make you hear it. She said I had to tell you about how your kindness and your roles helped her face the fear. How when she was scared at night, we would recite your movie lines to each other until she fell asleep." Behind the scenes, Stephen made a decision that would make this an unforgettable moment. He walked down from the stage and joined Anne and Ethan in the audience, disregarding every strict protocol of live production. "Ethan," Stephen said gently, kneeling down in the aisle beside their row, "would you like to play the message now? We're all here to listen." Ethan looked at the empty space on his other side, then at Anne, then at Stephen. "She'd probably be mad that I waited this long," he said with a small watery laugh. "She always said not to postpone gratitude, only to feel it." Anne smiled, but her eyes were full of unshed tears. "Maya sounds like she was an absolute force. Please. What was her favorite movie line of yours?" "The one from the sci-fi film," Ethan said immediately. "She said it reminded her of us, that no matter how far away she felt, no matter what happened, we belonged in the same universe, forever." Anne felt something profoundly open in her chest. That line had been written about loss, about finding connection even in vast emptiness. To know that it had comforted a young girl through something so final was overwhelming. "Ethan," Anne said, "I want to hear her voice. Is it okay?" Ethan nodded, unable to speak, and slowly pressed the play button on the ancient recorder. Then the studio heard it, a small faint voice, but undeniably clear. "Anne, if you ever hear this, thank you. You kept me alive." The sound ended, followed by a light static. The audience was completely quiet, hanging on to the lingering sound. The voice message was barely 5 seconds long. Anne continued to stare at the recorder. The message was so simple, so pure. She planned to give Ethan a hug, thank him, and keep her composure. She planned to keep her promise to Maya. Ethan was crying openly now, but he was holding his head high. "I kept my promise," he whispered to the space beside him. "Then I'm going to make a promise too," Anne said. She reached into her pocket and pulled out something small and shining, a delicate silver butterfly brooch that she always wore on important occasions. "This pin has been with me through every major premiere, every hard decision, every moment of self-doubt for the past 10 years. Anne said, "I want you to have it, Ethan. Not because you lost Maya, but because you loved her, because you kept your promise to her, because you're showing everyone here tonight what true sibling love looks like." Anne gently placed the silver pin into the lapel of Ethan's jacket, right over his heart. "Now you have a piece of Maya's voice and a piece of my resolve," Anne said. "And whenever you miss her, you remember that the deepest connections don't end just because someone goes away. They just find new ways to speak." But Anne wasn't finished. She looked at Stephen, then back at the audience. "Her voice still lives," Anne said simply. The studio, a room of hundreds, fell into a heavy, perfect silence that stretched for a full 20 seconds. Jimmy felt chills run down his spine. This was the climax. What happened next was pure, unedited humanity. Anne Hathaway turned back to Ethan. "Tell me one more thing about her. Something funny." Ethan smiled genuinely. "She always tried to sneak popcorn into the hospital room in her slippers." The entire audience began to laugh softly, a shared, imperfect, and incredibly healing sound that was absolutely perfect for honoring a young girl who believed that love could conquer anything. As they laughed, Ethan touched both the recorder and the silver pin, feeling connected not just to Maya, but to everyone in that studio who understood something about loss, grief, and the courage it takes to keep speaking when your heart is broken. The laughter subsided, but nobody moved. Anne and Ethan sat together in that row, holding hands, two people connected by shared memory and the understanding that some bonds are too important to be limited by life or death. The audience erupted in applause, but it wasn't entertainment applause. It was recognition, applause, acknowledgement of something sacred that had happened in front of everyone. Stephen returned to the stage, but he didn't try to transition back to normal show business. Instead, he did something incredibly unusual. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "tonight we learned something important from Ethan Miller and his sister Maya Chen. We learned that the most powerful thing about art isn't how it's filmed. It's how it connects us, how it helps us love each other better." Anne added her own message, still sitting with Ethan. "And we learned that the deepest gratitude doesn't end with goodbye. It just gets stronger. It just finds new ways to keep its promises." Ethan Miller returned home to California the next day, but he left the studio with something he hadn't had since Maya died. The knowledge that his sister's love was still with him, still protecting him, still keeping promises. Anne Hathaway kept her promise too. She dedicated her next press tour to Maya and all the fans who teach us how to give without limits. Before every interview, she would recall Ethan and Maya's story, reminding audiences that art's greatest power isn't entertainment, it's connection. The voice recorder and Anne's pin became inseparable for Ethan. He kept them on his desk while studying, carried them on important job interviews, and treasured them always. And every time he felt alone, he would look at the silver pin and remember that some bonds are forever, even when forever feels too short. 6 months later, Ethan started a small online community for young adults who had lost siblings. They called it the Universe Club, and they met every week to share memories, talk about movies, and listen to music that reminded them that love doesn't end just because someone goes away. Anne sent them a recorded message of encouragement, and she told the group something that became their motto. Connection isn't about how long you have together, it's about how deeply you love while you do. The empty seat next to Ethan in the studio became something of a quiet legend among the late-night staff. They started calling it Maya's seat. And whenever they had shows about loss, gratitude, or resilience, they would mentally dedicate that seat to young people who were learning that the deepest bonds transcend physical presence. And Stephen learned something that changed how he approached every interview. Sometimes the most important conversations happen not with the celebrity guest, but with the people in the audience who carry stories that remind us all what really matters. Maya's voice message wasn't just a recording anymore. It was proof that young people can understand gratitude in ways that adults spend lifetimes trying to comprehend. It was evidence that promises made in quiet hospital rooms are the most sacred promises of all, and it was a reminder that sometimes the most beautiful goodbyes are the ones that teach us how to keep loving someone even when they can't love us back in the same way. The late-night episode featuring Ethan and Maya's story became one of the most shared segments in the show's history. Not because of the celebrity factor, but because it reminded millions of viewers that everyone has a Maya, someone who loved them enough to make them promise to keep living, keep hoping, keep sharing the messages that prove love never really ends. Anne Hathaway still keeps the silver pin close during every major event, and she often tells people that it's not just jewelry. It's a reminder that the most powerful force in the universe isn't fame or success. It's the kind of love that makes a young man brave enough to keep a promise even when playing the message breaks his heart. It wasn't just late-night television that night. It was a masterclass in how gratitude transcends death, how promises to the people we love are sacred, and how sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply acknowledge that someone's love story, no matter how brief, mattered. Some connections are forever, even when forever feels too short. And in that studio, every sound and voice became a little more precious, every connection a little more sacred, every promise a little more important to be kept.